Hello and welcome to our first weekly roundup. This is another Black and Brown production. So, we've done a stack of other podcasts, but we figured it's time to unpack some of the weekly happenings from South Africa and the world. I find myself very curious during the week when I see lots of news, political, economic, sports news unraveling. And very few times do we have someone who can really unpack and help us understand what the deal is. So, my partner, a very good friend of mine, Aidan Brown. We're going to sit and just unpack some of the week's happenings. Aidan, I know we've been trying to do this for a super long time, so I'm glad we can sit down and pull at the twine and unravel what's happening in news here.
We're not organized, but we're committed.
I like it, not organized, but committed. So the first thing for me, and I think it's probably one of the biggest news stories of South African news this week, is the immigration protests.
Yeah.
I mean, roads were shut down. Some kids didn't go to school. Businesses were shut down. I happened to be on the roads for a bit of work, and it felt like it was COVID again. No one was out on the roads. Public transport was almost at a standstill. And, you watch mainstream media and you think to yourself, okay, you watch a bit of protesting and some of it got a little bit violent, unfortunately. But my thing is, it's two-pronged. One, why were South Africans protesting? And what was the end result? Did we achieve what I guess we're set out to achieve?
It's such a broad question. It's basically impossible to get around to looking at all the facets of it in just a couple of minutes. But to get round to some of the main points, the first thing that I'll start by saying is that South Africa has a general problem with lawlessness. And this includes border control and the movement of people and goods through South Africa. South Africa has become now a global transit hub, as an example, for the smuggling of people, firearms, and other illicit substances like narcotics, for example. And we have a serious problem that we cannot control who or what comes through South African borders. That includes all of our land borders. They're absolutely terrible. We know about that. No amount of soldiers on the land borders is going to solve that problem. You'd have to have one every 20 feet. Our oceans are also completely open. Our coastline is basically completely uncontrolled and people can just come and go as they please. We don't even know who's coming and going. And we have gotten down to the point where there is a fairly large population of undocumented people in South Africa. And it's very important to realize that people on the ground, people in townships and especially poorer areas and poorer communities are absolutely frustrated. They see all these people in their communities and they feel that they can't get places in clinics and schools for their children and housing and that kind of thing, and they're taking their jobs. And I completely understand that frustration on the ground. It makes sense to me. Having said that, you've got a bunch of radicals that have stepped up into this place and they're just using it, in my opinion, as a moment to score political points and to advance their own personal careers and agendas. So there is a problem with it. I think that xenophobia overall is very bad for South Africa. It sends bad messages to the business and investment market. It makes capital run away from South Africa. It's the kind of thing that makes capital run. And I think it's also important to say that a lot of media actually overhype what was going to take place on that Monday. My opinion was always that it would kind of fizzle out and that there wouldn't be too much going on, a little bit like the EFF shutdown.
Matjiu.
And in the end, there were a couple of pockets of violence here and there. But the protesters, for the most part, behaved themselves and people stayed in line and they exercised their constitutional rights. I don't support vigilantism. I don't support xenophobia. But it's about time that our home affairs, our border control, our police, our courts started actually doing their job 365 days a year. Not just 600 million rands worth one day of the year.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And you make some really good points. And I think we actually saw each other a couple of days before, and you sort of envisaged this as being pockets of small protests, which is exactly what happened, barring a little bit of violence here and there. But one of the big things for me is we've covered the borders in different podcasts. We've covered policing and the ability to maintain law and order. We've had this protest. a day or two later, things seem to be back to normal. What do you think what happens now? Like, what's the best way for, I guess, South Africa, South Africans, or maybe even government to say, right, this is what we're going to do to rectify the situation? Because we don't end up in a space where 30th of June becomes now 30th of August and September, and it becomes this recurring issue. How do you think, can curb that spiral?
We need to fortify the institutions that are responsible for controlling and monitoring the movements of people in South Africa. We do know that the Department of Home Affairs has done some fairly good work in the last year or two since the GNU. Having said that, it is a hugely problematic part of the administration of South African policy, politics, and just society in general. On top of that, the police never do their jobs. They're always, if they find somebody, an illegal who is undocumented, they're always happy to take a bribe. And the courts are really slow. There's a huge issue with that. For example, if somebody doesn't voluntarily leave and you want to deport them, they're going to go through a court. If there's these enormous backlogs and delays in the courts, that's an issue. People have also complained that, they come into South Africa legally, they're on a temporary permit, they go to get their work visas extended and that kind of thing, and nothing works. And then the last point, it's a side point, but I think it's really important to add, is that there's quite a bit of information coming through on that, on this movement now, to suggest, and I'm not saying that this is the truth, but there is some good information to suggest that there's some Bell Pottinger type misinformation campaigns or disinformation campaigns that are help driving this narrative. We know that some of the people behind these campaigns are quite close to Putin or, the Russian oligarchy. They've been on and off overseas, and there has been a little bit of just good evidence from investigative journalists like the Daily Maverick, where they can plot social media pressures, like influencers, these micro influencers and that kind of thing. So it's to understand that there is a grassroots movement on the ground. It does exist. Those people are there, but there does appear to be some other kind of nefarious elements that are compounding and multiplying the effect of everything that's taking place.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I guess it's something that we'll have to keep an eye on. And
nothing's changed though, Ben. Nothing's changed.
Yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same, as it were. So.
Every couple of years, every 5 years, 4, 5, 6 years, there's protests about xenophobia and foreigners in South Africa. It goes all the way back as far as I can remember. And I can tell you now, in 4 or 5 years, we're probably going to be back here, because we're probably not going to fix the vital institutions that are required to help alleviate this problem.
100%. All right. So speaking of institutions, one of the big stories that popped off this week around the Matjiu Commission, there was an alleged assassination. And I say alleged because there were rumors swirling and, news reports about Feroz Khan, and potentially the assassination attempt was possibly set up to avoid time in front of the commission. Do you know what may have happened there and what we're looking for going forward?
Well, it's very obvious that there's some fishy elements of this crime. We do know that South Africa's hitmen are very, very professional and well-trained. And usually if they want to get their target or their mark, they do that.
They don't miss, 100%.
Yeah, people have gone after elite policemen and soldiers and things like that. They go after these guys and they find them and they get them.
Yes.
And, there was the issue with the note, which looked a little bit suspicious. The kinds of wounds that he had looked a little bit suspicious. He wasn't driving an armored car, which there's questions around that. Where was his bodyguards or protection? And all of these are valid questions, and it looks completely suspect. We've obviously seen this before at the Matjiu Commission, and I'm sure Khan doesn't want to go there and get grilled. So there's that. On the flip side, now I'm playing the devil's advocate, because I have to also give light to some important voices in the fray. Chad Thomas is one of them, and he's a guy that knows, we've interviewed him before, he's a guy that knows a fair amount about what's going on in that world. And he made a comment which is fair, in that Khan was a very high-ranking member of law enforcement, And he was a high-profile guy. They did know to some extent that he was under threat. And what he said is that there was the possibility that he was trying to use different vehicles. He had received threats before. He had stated that he'd received threats before. There are questions around why wasn't he forced to take on a protection unit? Was he offered a protection unit? I'm told that he wasn't, that no additional security was offered to him. And I've heard that even as he's lying in hospital, they can't get additional security for him, that they've had to hire a private security company to come and protect him as he's fighting for his life. And even if he has done something wrong, and I'm not saying he has, that still has to obviously go before a court. You know, he's a very important person. He's a very important witness. You know, why wasn't he being protected? But it just points to a larger problem that we have in South Africa. Life is very, very cheap, as Mandy Wiener said in one of our previous interviews. It's become very, very easy to have somebody killed in South Africa. We've got the foreign assassins coming in. We've got the Izinkabi operating locally. And it wouldn't surprise me if it was just a sloppy hitman, somebody who just did a really bad job.
Yeah.
And it also wouldn't surprise me at all if the whole thing was a Brown Mokgotsi style setup. Who knows? Who knows, Ben?
Okay, I guess only Mr. Khan knows, and I guess those super close to him, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a balance there, just to get both sides of it.
Absolutely. No, I think that's fair. That's fair. Just moving slightly abroad, but with a hint of local news. Our dear Jacob Zuma. So far as I understand, the Gupta family had fled and couldn't be either traced, tracked down, or brought back to South Africa. Then appears a selfie with former President Jacob Zuma with the Gupta family in India.
Yes.
What is that about, and why is it so difficult to have them brought back into SA to face, I guess, the wrath of the law, if you will?
I'm not very well versed in the legal components of, you know, that kind of thing, like deportation and bringing extradition and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I will say about South Africa and about almost any country in the world is that when you want somebody to come back into your country to face trial, you often have to display that your country is safe, that that person will be kept safely, because you've got to remember that Gupta is a citizen of India. And the Indian government have an obligation to make sure that if he is sent back to South Africa to stand trial, that he'll get a fair trial. There's a lot of doubts around that in South African courts. We know that there's a lot of problems and corruption, and that's the way that the Indian government may be viewing it to some extent. We also know that prisons in South Africa are not safe. So as a legal argument, you can always turn around and say, we can't send our guy back. He's not going to get a free trial, probably a good, you know, decent trial. And his life's going to be in danger in prisons. People die in South African prisons all the time. Violence, TB, HIV, drug use, gang violence, you know, all that kind of thing. Then you also have to remember that these are extremely powerful people. They have networks in the underworld that has obviously been established. There are people that are obviously not beyond bribery, corruption, theft, bullying, manhandling. You know, these are not ethical and morally inclined people. So it would be quite easy for them to use both the law and informal sources and informal networks to fight extradition, to come back to South Africa.
Sure. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I'm somewhat unfamiliar with what's happening in that space, but I guess time will tell.
Yeah, it's a common problem with South Africa. It's very difficult to justify sending people back to South Africa to face trial, you know, when our justice system is in such shambles. And, you know, it's also a very important moment for South Africa because Jacob Zuma declared in this visit that he would like to run for president again. So it's a little bit of a statement. I'm sure that he was also talking to them about a little bit of funding, a little bit of help, because he's obviously having financial trouble at the moment. He's obviously deep in that. He'll be, for example, running out of funding to even campaign in the build-up to the next elections. he's just not going to be flush with cash. So I'm sure that he was asking AJ for a little bit of back pocket money.
Absolutely, a little brown envelope, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of thing, quite commonplace. And it's also very interesting because what I've heard is that there was a diplomat that accompanied Jacob Zuma on this visit. A South African diplomat that was there. I need to actually check up on that. And that's a very interesting move because in a way that's usurping power from the States if it's true. And, he went to this temple and they did a little bit of a PR campaign. It's basically what it is. It's Jacob Zuma standing up in a way going, I'm here, I'm present, I'm ready to campaign, look out for us in the upcoming elections.
No, it'll be very interesting to see. I mean, we also know that Jacob Zuma is not an unintelligent individual, so
no,
probably plays cards very in a very smart manner.
Not only is Jacob Zuma not unintelligent, he's actually a remarkably intelligent guy. Absolutely. And he's very, very, very often underestimated. For example, people critique his level of education. This is a man that absolutely mastered the KGB handbook. He was an intelligence guy during the apartheid era for the MK party, for the Mkhonto weSizwe, sorry. And he's a remarkably intelligent, remarkably dynamic person. And even though he's a little bit old, a little bit tired, having some financial problems, having some legal issues, never ever discount Jacob Zuma and don't count him out on a local election. He's going to get some power in 2027.
Oh, okay. Well, there it is. You heard it here. And then the last thing, the big news of the week. I mean, there is stacks of sports happening at the moment. The FIFA World Cup, which is taking place out in United States, Canada, and Mexico. There's the Springboks, which have obviously started their campaign recently, and they play over the weekend. The Proteas ladies team, they're playing. There's also Wimbledon. I mean, it's a whole mixed bag. So we'll just close off with sort of what's been happening in and around that sports world. I don't know if you've managed to watch any of the FIFA World Cup, but what I found quite fascinating, number one, obviously Bafana did exceptionally well, better than what a lot of critics had thought. I think we can be incredibly proud of the boys and put in this really stellar effort. And it was shown they were backed by SAFA and they managed to get a bit more funds in their accounts, and there were some sort of private investors who also sent in some cash. One of the things that I actually had a conversation with someone recently, if you're watching the games, every few sort of, I think, 23 minutes in the first half and 60 odd minutes in the second half, we're stopping for what they call hydration breaks.
Yeah. I'll never understand it.
No. Yeah. It's I watched one or two players' interviews and they spoke about the hydration breaks. Yeah. They said, listen, unless you're playing in an exceptionally hot place where temperatures are soaring,
yes,
we're all trained for this, we can do it. And which then begs the question, what are we doing it for? And having done some really basic research online, the amount of money that FIFA will make from the hydration breaks,
yes, which absolutely,
6 minutes a game across 39 days of football play, equates to, if I'm not mistaken, between $400 and $450 billion.
Yes.
Or $1 million worth of advertising revenue.
Yes.
Outrageous amounts of money for a corporation which is constantly under scrutiny for the way in which they handle sort of their voting and how they run their business. So, found that one a little bit interesting, but let's see. I mean,
they've learned from American football. The rules of the game, of a sports game, in many ways dictate the amount of media and advertising space that you can generate. So rugby, for example, is a difficult game because if the ref's doing a proper job, the game almost flows from minute all the way to the end of the half.
Yes.
And it's quite difficult to run advertising and have little banners come through and people pop up and talk about their brands and things like that because the game's going, people are watching the game and they're engaged. They don't want to be distracted by that kind of thing. And one of the things that I've found is that with American football, the game's starting and stopping all the time. There's always a little opportunity to pop up a little ad or something like that. And it drives ad revenue through the roof. And I think that FIFA have just caught on to that. I'm not a fan of FIFA. I find them to be a ruthless organization. I remember what they did to South Africa during the World Cup. We weren't left with the kind of prosperity that we thought with long-standing prosperity and investments. We ended up with stadiums that are expensive to run and maintain and difficult to use.
Yeah, empty stadiums, areas that was somewhat built up,
Yeah.
they just sort of fell away. And
I think it's a good point now, to ask you about the women's cricket, because in some ways, women's cricket suffers from that same problem, where people turn around and they say, why don't we support the ladies' teams a little bit more? But the problem is that nobody watches them. And so there's depleted advertising revenue, and then there's depleted funding. There isn't as much funding for them.
yeah, no, you're spot on. So in terms of those two respects, so there are not enough people watching. A few years ago, we hosted a massive tournament
Mm,
here. It may have been one of the World Cup iterations. I'd gone to one of the games,
mm.
and a stadium which you and I are very familiar with, the Wanderers Cricket Stadium in Johannesburg, which seats, I mean, tens of thousands of people.
Yeah.
I could count maybe 100, 150 people in that stadium. And you're talking about your national team playing against another international
Yeah.
team at the highest possible level in a quarters, a semis, or a final game. And we're just not getting behind the team. So, I mean, yes, women's cricket is at a somewhat early
Yeah.
stage. It's not as far down the line as, say, the men's Proteas team. But from a delivery perspective, we've consistently, barring a game this week, been in finals of major tournaments for the last few years. So there's no reason why we shouldn't get the eyes behind and also bums and seats. It's not to say ticket prices are outrageous. The tickets are incredibly affordable.
Yes.
And we just, one, not seeing enough advertising and backing from, I don't know, maybe sponsors, media,
Yeah.
and then television time. It's just like, when do we get to see these games? They're on arbitrary channels that also we don't really get to see unless you're on a massive sort of
Yeah.
subscription or streaming service. And so, yeah, I think they've done a massive disservice in that regard. And then again, you look at the overarching holding companies. Are they doing enough to help the teams get out there? So, I mean, it's something that we'll have to look into. I mean, I think between you and I, we know some friends in the different cricketing societies. So I think, yeah, we'll make a plan to get one of them in studio and chat to them.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the economics of women's sports doesn't add up to where it should, and South Africa definitely has that problem. I have a feeling that these companies that promote these games and that are responsible for that part of the industry probably don't see a good enough return on investment. They probably do their checks and their forecasts, and they work out that if they spend R1 million on women's cricket, they'll make 10%. If they spend another million on men's, they'll make 20%. And it could just be something like that. But what I will say is that if there are people out there anywhere in South Africa, if you actually want to support women's sport and you want to support your local heroes, you have to go out there. You've got to watch games. You've got to go buy seats. You've got to buy tickets. Even better, you support merchandising that they're involved in. I see that there is 2 ladies that are at the Judo Commonwealth at the moment, and they are wearing Mizuno judo gis. And I would like to know, are they sponsored by Mizuno? Because if Mizuno is supporting those ladies, I'll buy a Mizuno gi. It's that kind of thing.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, it gives credibility to the to the brand and to the players, So yeah, let's see. Hopefully the sporting world picks up. I know we've got a couple of heavyweight presenters and things who we'd like to get into studio. The likes of Mr. Worldwide, Robert Marawa.
Yeah, I'd love to get Robert Marawa.
Your call out, sir.
Yeah.
Call out. We'll see you in studio soon to unpack a bit more sport. But yeah, I mean, I think, look, there's tons of sports that's still happening, and the Springboks play obviously over the weekend. Rassie Erasmus released what looks like a really phenomenal team. So I guess next week we'll unpack how the team goes.
Yeah, I mean, the Springboks are one of the last remaining centers of excellence in South Africa. I know I'm going to get completely smashed for saying this, but really, the Reserve Bank and the Springboks, maybe. And the lesson to be learned is that having very good structures and feeder systems from the bottom all the way to the top at the very elite end of the sport is absolutely essential. If you want to get South African soccer really, really at the highest level, you got to start with the 5 and 6 year olds. You got to make sure that that's good. And then the primary school kids are good, and the club soccer, and then the high school and university, and that you have this brilliant feeder system all the way through, that these guys aren't just like 20 and then finding their way into Premier League soccer and battling a little bit.
No, you're absolutely spot on. And I've had this conversation with some mates from school around how do we grow the rest of the league? I mean, if we were to benchmark against like the Premier League in the UK, I mean, they've got, obviously you've got your
Yeah.
Premier League, but then the leagues further down, the 2 tiers down, are still producing exceptional players. The players are well managed. They don't need to have an alternative income.
Yeah.
They're playing football full time. Whereas in SA, unfortunately, it's sort of the top 3 or top 4 teams that have got the backing, have got the funding, they've got, they've got investors who will put a lot behind their teams and players. And so hopefully it's a way in which we can look at other sponsors just looking down the list and going, okay, well, teams 5 to 10, there's potential here. Let's invest in them
Yeah.
and help those guys grow. And then, as you say, work down from grassroots level.
People don't want to stay in South African sport. They just want to get the hell out of South Africa as fast as they can. Rugby is one of the only sports where people stay on and try and have sustained careers in South Africa. I find with a lot of the soccer players, for example, they try and do a couple of years in the PSL, and if they can, the first thing they do is they leave South Africa and they go overseas and try and make a space for themselves somewhere else. And I see the same thing, for example, in MMA now. We don't have a feeder system for the MMA fighters. And what happens is the guys do their best to do a few fights in the EFC or Versus or whatever it is. And then they try and go off to one championship or the UFC or something like that. That brings us off to the last note, which is Dricus du Plessis fighting in a week or two. He's
back.
Yeah. And let's hope that he can win this fight and get back in a title shot.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, get behind the boy and the boys
Yep.
and the girls for that matter. But yeah, that brings us to the end. Thanks so much for watching. It's our first weekly roundup. So yeah, keep watching. We're going to try and do as many of these as possible, try and capture as much content as we can. And this is another Black and Brown production, and we'll see you very soon.
Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.